In this video, we're going to take a look at and do sort of an introductory deep dive into behavioral change. So, to kick things off, I really want us to think about, some of the following kind of questions. I want you to think about, what's the most difficult thing you've ever had to overcome or work through in your life? Literally, for some of you, it might have been a life-threatening condition, something like, a car accident or cancer or something like that, or having a family member go through a life-threatening condition. Sometimes it's not necessarily life-threatening. Sometimes it's a really hard thing you've had to work through in your life. Maybe it's that college algebra class or Chem 2 class. It's all relative to each of us. Even on a less serious note, sometimes just walking across the room and asking that person out that you've always had sort of feelings for, and to be able to overcome those nerves and that apprehension, to be able to actually ask that person out, that's a really difficult thing to work through in life. So whether we're talking about life threatening or a class that we're trying to overcome or a personal challenge, whatever it might be, I want us to be thinking about, how does that process occur? How do we actually overcome those obstacles in our life? Another question that I pose is, why do you think so many New Year's resolutions fail? Think about that for a moment. Most people, it's very common, it's ubiquitous to many people, that we set New Year's resolutions, whether that's to lose weight, cut back on smoking, use our cell phones less when we're driving, whatever it might be. But why? Why does the research suggest that 50% or more of people actually abandon their New Year's resolution by February or early March? Change is hard. I think that's one of the commonalities to what we're going to be discussing with the behavioral change process, is that change is not easy. So we're going to do sort of a deep dive into our introduction on the change process, and you've got some notes in your in your canvas that kind of go along with this. So as we take a look at this and we start getting into the behavioral change literature, there's a few things that I think I want you to really know as students, and there's four. And these are competencies or objectives that are going to kind of run throughout the course. So where are these coming from? So actually, if you download and look at, for example, uh, the chapter objectives, really this should be course objectives. Um, you have all the objectives over the throughout the course for each of the chapters, but as well sometimes we have some supplemental material that we're integrating in. For example, early on in the semester, I integrated some information from Coakley's chapter on sports sociology. But if you scroll down all the way to the bottom of those objectives, you'll see what is everything you need to know about behavioral change in this course. So that document is uploaded in the Canvas system. So all that being said, when we look at your handout or your notes, this is kind of sort of guide us through our lecture for today, if you will. So what is it that I think that you should know about the behavioral change process? Well, first and foremost, you need to be able to summarize particular theory on um, on how we teach patients, clients, athletes. We'll use this term patients loosely. Um, about behavioral change. The point there is, you have to understand the theory behind behavioral change in order to be able to then apply and, facilitate interventions. That's the idea. Number two, I want you to be able to effectively communicate those techniques that help facilitate the change process. Now, you don't have to understand how all this is going to, take place right now as we're talking about it. We're going to develop these competencies over the course of the semester. We're just introducing you to it at this point. But you're going to learn very specific communication techniques in this course to facilitate that change process. Um, you're going to describe and be able to look at how psychosocial techniques can be used to again, facilitate change in human behavior. Again, whether we're talking about change being like changing bad habits, whether that might be, eating less fast food or a sedentary lifestyle so that somebody, exercises more, or maybe it's, on a more personal level, cussing less or getting more in touch with somebody's spiritual faith, whatever it might be. We're going to help learn some of those psychosocial techniques and interventions that help with that change process. And then four, we're going to couch all of this in trying to be culturally competent in understanding how individuals from all different kinds of backgrounds, um, how we might interact with those individuals um, to help facilitate that change process. So all that being said, when we look at, why is change so hard? I've already asked a couple of those questions from the standpoint of, New Year's resolutions to overcoming major barriers that are in our lives. Like, why is it so hard for people to do these things? Well, it's hard for people to live healthy lifestyles. Um, you know, the data suggests that actually only about 25% uh, of adults 18 and older engage in any kind of physical activity on a weekly basis, let alone meeting the ACSM requirements, for example, of 3 to 5 days per week of, 30 to 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity. Anyway, all that being said, most people don't engage in much physical activity or exercise. And then we kind of go down this list of, not only do people not engage in regular physical activity, many people aren't eating a healthy and well-rounded diet. Many people aren't managing stress in their life. Many people engage in high risk behavior, whether we're talking about, uh, you know, smoking or alcohol use or, texting and driving. But then as well, we kind of broaden that to, even engaging in healthy relationships in our lives with, personal friends to our more romantic relationships, and even kind of bigger than that, and, finding purpose and meaning and inspiration in life. All of that kind of adds up to this idea of what it means to live a healthy and well life. Um, so I kind of posed the question already, why is it so hard for people to live healthy lifestyles? And I encourage you, as you're going through your notes, write down some of your reasons, write down some of your personal reasons. uh, sometimes it's, we don't know the proper foods to eat. Sometimes, even if it comes to, like, for example, texting and driving, it's not uncommon to think like, I'm good, I'm okay, I can text and drive and still control my vehicle. So, there's sort of this idea of, I've never been in an accident before, I've never been pulled over, so I'm okay. There's all kinds of reasons why people don't engage in healthy lifestyles. So be thinking about that and write down a few of your own as we're going through this lecture video. Um, Another concept that comes up is what we're talking about with, what do we mean by an actual habit? So one of the reasons why people don't engage in healthy lifestyles, or it's so hard to change, is because we have these habits. And so what do we mean by a habit? Well, think of a negative habit that you have in your life. Maybe it's, biting your nails. Maybe it's you cuss too much. Maybe, you're not as in touch with your spiritual faith as you'd like to be. Maybe it's whatever, smoking, whatever it might be. Think of a habit, particularly maybe a negative habit that you have. Well, it probably helps you better relate to what we mean by this definition. A habit is a repetitive meaning reoccurring, often compulsory, meaning that compulsory is not just the repetitive nature, but it's almost like habitual in the sense that we don't think about it. Like you just automatically do it. Um, for me, when I get in the car, a compulsory behavior is attach the seatbelt. I was taught that growing up by my dad. Didn't always want to, as you know, as a kid, but he just kind of pounded it into us, and now it's habitual. It's compulsory to just attach that seatbelt. It's a way of thinking, feeling, behaving. It's so ingrained into human psychology, and those being our three components of human psychology. It's how we think, or our cognitions, it's our feelings, our affect, and then also our behavior or our actions. So, habits, it's repetitive, it's reoccurring, it's compulsory, meaning automatic ways of how we act with our psychology, our human psychology, thinking, feeling, behaving, all that good stuff. Moving on, what determines our habits or our ways of acting in the world? You know, we talked about our lifestyle. What sort of things feed into? Well, most of you in this course might have not have ever thought of, you know, one, two, three, four, five, six, and there might be more. Some of these subcomponents of what influences my behavior. If we're talking about, let's use the example of eating fast food. I will admit, one of my favorite fast food restaurants is Taco Bell. It's a guilty pleasure. It's not just a personal choice on my part that I like Taco Bell. There are other determinants, if we will. So when we say determinants, what are some of those? Well, uh, what are some of those determinants that influence my decisions to run through the Taco Bell drive-through? Okay, so there are political determinants, and there's some examples here. Um, you know, there are laws in place that heavily tax, for example, tobacco purchases. Um, there are political campaigns and commercials out there that kind of educate youth on the negative effects of tobacco use. Um, so there are political systems in place that help influence people's actions and people's behaviors, people's choices. Our social environment, our cultural environment, heavily influence our choices. If we look at, for example, a couple of these, like crime rates in an area or socioeconomic status, think about for a moment, if you grow up in an area, particularly an urban area with high crime, low socioeconomic status, it's quite possible that the facilities there, as far as parks and recreation, like public park access, might not be as nice and accommodating as a more affluent area. Well, if you grow up in an area where, parks are not as well lit, they're not as easily accessible, there's a lot of crime in that area, kids aren't going to hang out in that area. Parents don't want their kids hanging out in that area. So our social and our cultural environment heavily influence our behaviors and our actions. Our physical environment, um, you know, how, how we access transportation. Uh, if you grow up in more of an urban area, for example, and you're reliant on public transportation to get to, your local YMCA, it's harder to access those workout facilities. Um, our health services, not just working out, but taking care of our bodies, getting regular physicals. If somebody doesn't have insurance or, to actually go to the doctor and get a physical, costs quite a bit of money, that's a deterrent to, seeking out those services. There are obviously individual components to behavior and behavior change. My personal behavior, do I smoke? Do I use drugs? My level of physical activity, my hygiene levels, all of those things influence the degree to which I engage in a healthy lifestyle. And all that being said, we can't discount biological and genetic factors. Um, Individuals with a history of chronic diseases such as coronary heart disease, diabetes, certain cancers. No matter how much I work out, um, I might just be more predisposed to those conditions than somebody that doesn't have that in their family history. But that being said, what I can do is I can control many of these other factors: political, social culture, physical environment, my health services, my individual behavior. Particularly, you don't often have as much control over your biological and genetic components, but I have some degree of control over those others to be able to manage my life and my lifestyle and create change in my life. So as we look at this, change and leading a healthy lifestyle occurs at all of these levels, not just the individual level. And I think that's a point that I want to impress upon you as the students, that change is not a always just a personal thing. It occurs at many levels of our political environment, our sociocultural environment, our physical environment, and so on. And as we think about the change process, and you as students, and I'll use the term scientist practitioners, because that's what you need to be. You're not just going out there and being a practitioner, and maybe you're not going to do research, but you're going to be a scientist practitioner in the sense of you need to understand the literature, you need to understand the science behind change. And so, all that being said, regardless of how you intervene in your future professions in helping people change their lives, you need to understand that interventions are grounded in what we're going to label in this course and we're going to call evidence-based practices. So those evidence-based practices are really grounded in three components. The first being research. I'm a firm believer that scholarship and peer-reviewed, scholarly articles are kind of the foundation of evidence-based practices. It's what have other people done out there, studies that they've conducted that help inform my practices, okay? But that's just one component of evidence-based practices. The second component is professional experience. So what are my experiences as a coach, as an administrator, as a medical professional or counselor, whatever professions you're going into? What are my professional experiences and how do those inform the ways that I relate to my patients, clients, athletes, whoever I might be working with? So again, it's a combination of the scholarship, it's my professional experiences, and then also evidence-based practices look at a third component, which is, we use these terms loosely in this course: patient, client, athlete, anybody that you're working with. It's that client's preferences. What do they want? So when we look at all three of these in combination with one another, that's what we mean by evidence-based practices. And a true professional uses evidence-based practices to design interventions. In this course, while there are dozens or maybe even hundreds of different theories on healthy change and leading healthy lifestyles, we're going to look at three in particular. Okay. I like that number because it's manageable. As well as I've looked at this course or textbook and integrating other readings, these three in particular are kind of relatable to many of the professions many of you students are going into, whether that be exercise and sport science, physical education, sport management, athletic training. Hopefully these three theories are somewhat relatable. So let's take each of them in turn. But just to note, those three are the trans-theoretical model of change, two, motivational interviewing, and then three, the disconnected values model. Trans-theoretical model of change is likely in your textbook. I don't believe motivational interviewing is, and I know that disconnected values model is not. But we're just going to provide a short introductory to each of these models kind of in this lecture video. And then many of your readings and future discussions in the course will kind of dive deeper into them. But let's just kind of scratch the surface on each of these models. So first of all, let's look at trans-theoretical model of change. Okay, so first of all, while we say this is a theory of therapy, not necessarily therapy in the counseling sense, but I want us to think about it in the broader sense of just helping people prepare for that readiness to act on a new behavior in their life. And oftentimes, even in the sports management professions or athletic training, you know, we're helping people change. We're helping people facilitate new behaviors in their life. So we have, and really what theoretical model of change does is help people assess, really me as the professional, I am assessing their readiness for change. And then we're going to provide certain strategies and processes to help influence that change. Um, in order to be able to do that, it is a stage model. So what do we mean by that? A stage model is oftentimes thought of as a linear model. It's a series of steps that a person goes through. So we might go through from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Those stages occur in a process, all right? So, and through that process, we're going to be looking at sort of a person's self-efficacy. Self-efficacy being that my personal belief. To what degree do I believe I'm in control, I have agency, I have influence and confidence to change? And we're going to look at as well that person's decisions along the way. You know, kind of what are the pros and cons of, you know, facilitating this change process. So as we work through this model, we had mentioned that it is a stage model. And that as a stage model, we're going to work through, you know, traditionally 5 stages. You might look up online and see that there is a 6th stage. I think maybe even our textbook talks about a 6th stage, but here we're just going to talk about the 5 basic stages. That being pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and then maintenance. So what do we mean by those? Pre-contemplation, it's really nowhere even on my radar. So let's go back to the fast food example. Let's say that eventually I wanted to cut back on my consumption of fast food. And you know, particularly I don't want to eat Taco Bell anymore. All right, so right now, if that's not even on my radar in the next 3 to 6 months to even initiate that change, I'd probably be in the pre-contemplation stage. All right. However, if it's sort of jogging through my mind that, hey, you know what, it might be a good idea to cut back on my fast food consumption. Don't know exactly how I would do that, but it might be a good idea. You know, maybe a doctor has told me that, maybe a significant other has said, hey, we're spending too much money on fast food, you know, or maybe it's just a personal reflection. Might be in that 2nd stage of contemplation. Now, preparation means I'm no longer just thinking about it, I'm actually going through the mental preparation to put that in place. So maybe I'm thinking about, okay, I've looked at my bank statements. I typically eat fast food 5 days a week. You know, maybe I need to cut back to 2 or 3. So I'm already starting to think about, you see, how I might be able to do that. Then in the 4th stage, I'm looking at action. How do I actually start doing that? So now I've set the goals in preparation. I'm thinking about it. Now I start acting upon those goals. And I've cut back. I'm looking at, okay, cutting back from 5 to 2 days per week. Or maybe I cut back from 5 in the first week to 3 times per week. And then in week 2 or week 3, maybe I cut it back to 2 days per week. So you see there's that action component to it. Then in that 5th stage, we call that maintenance. And maintenance is really about that point where I've been at this for so long that it starts to be automatic, Where you see a sixth stage is what they call termination. Termination is about, I've completely discontinued my old habit or my old behavior. Now, all that being said, all three, all these 5 or 6 stages, it's not uncommon for relapse to occur. Actually, trans-theoretical model of change says that it's actually expected that maybe during those first few weeks of the change process, maybe I set the goal of only eating fast food 3 times per week, but I slip and have it a fourth time. That doesn't mean that I completely abandoned my goal, but you as the change coach, you expect that people are going to relapse. People are going to fall short sometimes of their goals. They're going to regress a little bit. And that's all part of the process. So moving on, let's talk about motivational interviewing. This is our second model in the course. Motivational interviewing is it is an evidence-based practice. So remember, we talked about evidence-based or best practices before. It means that there's research to back it. Professionals have studied it, and clients have, or patients have given their feedback on this model or this theory. So motivational interviewing, it is well documented. It works to help people change. Particularly, a cornerstone of this model is that we're trying to help people overcome that ambivalence that keeps people from, changing in their life. So what do we mean by ambivalence? Ambivalence means I want two things at the same time. So let's talk about tobacco use. So maybe I dip. And so ambivalence means that one part of me, it's kind of like the angel and the devil on the shoulders. So on this side, the angel is telling me, hey, this is bad for your health. You're spending too much money on this. That's chirping in my ear. Yet on this side, the devil is telling me, hey, this is a great way to relieve stress. You're not spending that much money. It could always be worse. It's not like you're smoking cigarettes and it's causing damage to your lungs. I get it. There's other damage occurring, but we're rationalizing it. There are upsides to it. Particularly, hey, it helps him cope with some really tough situations like stress. Like it helps me bring that stress level down. So there's this ambivalence. There's these two sides of it, and we're helping people through motivational interviewing work through that ambivalence. It is a very client-centered, meaning it's focused on that person that we're working with. It's directive in the sense that there's a series of steps. It's guided. There are activities that we take the person through. It's not just completely open-ended and we just endlessly listen to the person and in order to help them change. But it's directed. It is focused on the client, and it's all about helping them change their intrinsic behavior. Intrinsic meaning that motivation that comes from within me. It's not about me hanging that carrot out in front of somebody to make them change, force them to change, or reward them to change. I want to help people change from the inside out. So in order to be able to do that, as the change coach, as the counselor, as the facilitator of that change, we do that in very non-directive ways in the sense of it is guided. There are techniques. It's goal focused. We don't take a judgmental approach. We don't confront the person, and we're not going to be their adversary in the process. We're not going to throw it in their face. Hey, you got to quit dipping. Do you realize what that's doing? You're at increased risk for different forms of cancer. You know how much money you're spending. Do you know how bad that is for your health? No, we don't take that approach with motivational interviewing. While there is education to the process, we're not going to beat it over the person's head. So as we look at this, kind of some of the central or foundational components to motivational interviewing, we want to help facilitate that internal or intrinsic motivation. And so how we're going to do that, we're going to explore both the ups and the downsides. So literally we might ask somebody, hey, what are the upsides to your bad habit? There are upsides. Also, what are some of the downsides or consequences to this bad habit? So we're going to explore that ambivalence. We're going to rely heavily on our foundational skills of what we're going to call our ORS techniques. OARS. OR stands for open-ended questions. We're going to ask a lot more open-ended questions instead of saying, have you ever thought about stopping tobacco use? That can be answered with a yes or no. That's closed. More open-ended might be, tell me about times in your life where you've thought about, cutting back on your tobacco use. Do you see how that's more open-ended and gets a person engaged in dialogue? So that's open-ended versus closed-ended questions. We want to ask more open-ended questions. A stands for affirmations. We want to give people affirmations and encouragement along the way of what they're doing. We want to affirm, things that they've done. Like, great job, you've tried to work on this in the past. You've tried to cut down on your tobacco use, always haven't been successful, but that's a great job making the attempt. We're going to kind of we're going to work through and look at what was good about those attempts, and we're going to build on that in this go around. R, reflections. All right, so we're going to reflect back, to that client, that patient, that athlete. Maybe at this point they're super discouraged about, hey, I've failed all these other times trying to cut back on my tobacco use or cutting back on how often I eat fast food. We might reflect back as that change coach and say, I can tell, I can hear it in your voice, how discouraged, how defeated you are in that this isn't going to work this time around. But I also hear hope in your voice that you want it to work. So we're reflecting back that person's affect and their emotions and their thought processes. In this case, in the example that I just gave, you're reflecting back that person's discouragement, but also you're picking up that they have a sense of hope as well. S, moving on, our final component of the ORS technique. S stands for summarizing. Okay, so you're going to summarize back often with that client, with that athlete, what their experience is. So maybe that summarization might be something along the lines of, you've told me a lot about your experience, and how often you've tried to cut back on tobacco use, or how often you're eating fast food. And you've told me about some of the struggles that that you want to cut back because it costs quite a bit of money. It's having you're worried about your health and your well-being, yet you're concerned that you don't have the right strategies in place to be able to overcome it this time. So what we're doing there is we're summarizing a segment or a part of that conversation to help that person further reflect and think about their experience. So we use those 4 techniques: ORS, open-ended questions; affirmations; R being reflections; and then S being our summarization technique, so summarizing. We try to couch all of this in a present-focused mindset with the client. We don't want to focus too much on the past. We don't want to get too stuck in the future. While those might inform the present, we want to keep it on, okay, what are we doing right here, right now? Let's keep that focus on the present so that we can move forward to future. Transitioning. All right, so we've talked about trans-theoretical model of change. We've talked about motivational interviewing. Our third component of our models or our theories that we're going to get into in this course is disconnected values model. So as a final model, we're going to look at how does this facilitate the change process? Well, in particular, disconnected values model, or DVM, we're going to look at very specific cognitive behavioral. We're going to be looking at a person's thoughts and their actions or their behaviors. And we're going to implement a specific set of strategies to help that person facilitate that change process. Okay, so How does that work? Well, one of the first components that we're going to look at is we're going to examine the benefits. And we did this in motivational interview. We're going to kind of look at sort of a pros and cons analysis, the benefits in contrast to the cost or the consequences of a negative behavior or a habit that a person has in their life. So when we do that, we want to look at, okay, again, what are the kind of that angel and the devil sort of approach? What are the upsides of eating too much fast food? What are the downsides to it? And as we do that, we're engaging this client, this athlete, in um, in further reflection on their own part. So that's one of the first components. Look at the cost benefit. Part two is we're going to look at and help that person, help that athlete identify and really pick out what are their deepest levels of their values and their beliefs that are in their life. So for example, maybe it's health, maybe it's honesty, maybe it's being, a person of integrity, maybe it's hard work and determination. But whatever those values are, um, and you'll have a set of values checklist as sort of a cheat sheet, if you will. But oftentimes it's easier for people to see a long list of values and say, yeah, that one, I identify with that one. I identify with faith. I identify with honesty. I identify with friendships or family. When people can see those, it's easier for them to check those off. So we're going to help people connect with what are those deep, deep, deep values that they hold in their life. Then, building off of part one and part two, we're going to help them really look at, okay, is there a disconnect between their negative habits and their values? So if I say that I value health, okay, living a healthy lifestyle, but my negative habit is eating too much fast food, I might look at that and say, yeah, you know what? There really is. How can I really live a healthy and well lifestyle with my eating plan, but also eat fast food 5 to 6 days per week? Okay, so we want to help them identify if that disconnect is there. Um, Regardless of it being there or not, hopefully they're going to identify that yes, a disconnect, those things aren't congruent with one another, they don't sync with one another. Well, part four is that disconnect, is that incongruency, is that acceptable to the person? Most of the time, if somebody's really wanting to change something in their life, they're going to say, no, that's not acceptable. For others that are maybe in the pre-contemplation stage, going back to trans-theoretical model, maybe it is acceptable. And we just have to accept that as the change coach sometimes, that they're not ready to change that in their life. So we kind of take them through through those stages, or if we want to think of it as a stage model, or those strategies, if you will. But as we do that, we're implementing a number of strategies. We're looking at the pros and the cons. We're doing the values checklist. We're going to help them, through the goal setting process. As the change coach, I'm going to help facilitate that change by giving encouragement and reinforcement and pointing out, when they're making mistakes. And, we're part of that process with them. So, all of these models, whether we're looking at trans-theoretical model of change, disconnected values model, or motivational interviewing, you as the change coach, me as a change coach, I'm very much in it with the client or the patient, to help them change. They are the captain of the ship. They are the leader in that process, but I'm here as a support system. So as we get ready to wrap this up, hopefully this was kind of an introduction to behavioral change. One of the things that I want to leave you with, and as we move forward, is that all of these models, all three of those models that we just went over, they're all empirically based. They're all based in valid, reliable, work that has been done. There have been researchers, in other words, that have looked at and tested and evaluated components of these models to suggest that, hey, these are evidence based. And so, that being said, in this process, this video and how I just outlined each of those three models is not enough. What we need to be able to do in this course, and you as a future professional, you need to be able to review and look at and read other peer-reviewed scholarly studies to provide you a foundation, um, because that's what it really means to be a competent professional and a scientist practitioner, with helping people facilitate any kind of change in their life. So as we wrap up, this video was really about looking at uh, some of the introductory components of how we facilitate change. Go back to those, four competencies. We're going to dive deeper in this course. As we move further in this course, we're going to look at some of the journal articles. We're going to get into it in, one of the chapters. We're going to take a deeper dive into facilitating behavioral change. So I hope, in the process of, this video, this was a good introduction for you. Hopefully that helps you with, not just understanding behavioral change, but working through the handout in the course, and gives you sort of a context of what we're going to be doing in this class, because behavioral change is going to be a huge component of it. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being part of this, and I look forward to talking with you in future lectures and videos. Take care.